Zeus was the king of the gods, the highest among the immortals, ruling over the sky, weather, law and order, destiny, fate, and the rights of kings. He was imagined as a powerful and mature man, often shown with a strong build and a dark, thick beard. In his hands, he carried a lightning bolt, a symbol of his unmatched power, along with a royal scepter, and he was always accompanied by an eagle, the proud bird that represented his rule over the skies. Zeus was the youngest child of the Titans Kronos and Rhea, and his birth was unlike that of his older siblings. Kronos, driven by fear of a prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, swallowed each child as they were born, trapping them in his stomach. But when it was time for Zeus to be born, his mother Rhea could not bear to lose another child, so she came up with a plan. She secretly gave birth to Zeus and hid him away in a cave on the sacred Mount Dicta in the island of Crete, wrapping a stone in swaddling cloth to trick Kronos into thinking it was the newborn god. Zeus was raised in secret, far away from his father's eyes, nurtured by kind and gentle nymphs who fed him with the nourishing milk of the magical goat Amalthea, a creature of divine strength and care. Around him danced the Curetes, fierce and loyal warriors who guarded the infant god. They clashed their shields and swords in loud rhythms, creating a thunderous sound that would mask his cries and keep his location hidden. As he grew older, Zeus became strong and wise, prepared to take his place among the gods and fulfill the destiny his father had tried to stop. When the time was right, Zeus called upon the goddess Métis, who was clever and resourceful, to help him. She crafted a powerful potion and gave it to Kronos, who drank it unknowingly. The magic worked, and one by one, the swallowed gods were released from Kronos' belly, reborn into the world again. Zeus was now joined by his freed siblings, including Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Together, they prepared for a war that would shake the very foundations of the universe. But Zeus knew that he needed more strength to defeat the powerful Titans, so he went down into the dark depths of Tartaros, the deep pit beneath the earth, and broke the chains of the monstrous sons of heaven who had been imprisoned there. These were the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants who were grateful for their freedom, and the Hecatoncheires, the hundred-handed beings who hurled enormous boulders with ease. As a gift of thanks, the Cyclopes gave Zeus his mighty lightning bolts, crackling with unstoppable energy. Then began the great war of the gods, a long and violent struggle between the younger Olympians and the older Titan gods. The Hecatoncheires threw their stones with incredible force, shaking the mountains, while Zeus hurled his lightning bolts from the sky, setting fire to the world and sending shockwaves across the earth. The battle raged on, but eventually the strength and unity of Zeus and his allies proved too much. Kronos and the Titan gods were defeated and cast down into the depths of Tartaros, where they were imprisoned behind unbreakable gates, far from the light of the world. With the war over, the new gods turned to the task of dividing the world among themselves. They cast lots to see who would rule each part of the cosmos. Zeus won the heavens and the sky, where he would reign as king over gods and men. Poseidon was given the vast and ever-changing sea, while Hades took dominion over the quiet and shadowy underworld. Now ruling as king, Zeus did not forget the wisdom of Métis, the goddess who had helped him begin his journey. But when an oracle revealed that any son born to Métis would eventually overthrow him, just as he had overthrown Kronos, Zeus took a drastic step. He swallowed Métis whole, hoping to stop the prophecy. Yet Métis was already pregnant, and within Zeus, their child continued to grow. In time, the goddess Athena was born, not in the usual way, but from Zeus's own head, fully grown and dressed in shining armor, a warrior of wisdom and strength. Later, Zeus chose his sister Hera to be his wife, the queen of the heavens. Before their marriage, Zeus used his charm and divine power to win her heart. Together they ruled from the heights of Mount Olympus, watching over the world and its many creatures. From his throne, Zeus maintained order, kept the balance of fate, and guided the destinies of gods and mortals alike, always with the lightning bolt in hand and the eagle at his side, a reminder to all of his power, his justice, and his place as the one true king of the gods. Zeus, after having risen to power through a long and brutal battle against the Titans, began to shape the order of the new world, and with it came not only his rule over the divine, but also his dealings with mortals and immortals alike. After securing his place in the heavens, he took Hera, his sister and the queen of the gods, as his wife, though their relationship was not one of perfect harmony. Zeus, using clever trickery, first approached her in the form of a small, helpless cuckoo bird, and when Hera took pity on the bird and held it close, he revealed his true form and claimed her for marriage. But even though the king and queen of the heavens were bound together, their union was full of arguments and jealousies, for while Hera was proud and watchful, Zeus often let his desires lead him astray. Though they ruled side by side, their constant quarrels became a well-known trait of their divine relationship, showing that even the gods themselves were not free from conflict and emotion. In the early days of the world, the clever Titan Prometheus shaped mankind from the earth and gave them gifts that helped them survive. Most importantly, the fire that he stole from the gods. This act of defiance angered Zeus, for he believed that fire and the knowledge that came with it were to remain in the realm of the gods alone. As punishment for this disobedience, Zeus ordered the creation of the first woman, Pandora, and sent her to Earth carrying a vessel, some say a jar, others a box, filled with sorrows and troubles that, once released, would forever burden mankind. This was a punishment not just for Prometheus, but for all humanity. Prometheus himself was not spared, as Zeus had him seized and chained to the side of a mountain, far away from any help, where each day an eagle would come to tear at his flesh, feeding on his liver, which would grow back each night only for the torment to begin again. The early generations of mankind, once given the power of fire and knowledge, eventually fell into wickedness and forgot their virtues, becoming cruel, unjust, and corrupt. Seeing how far they had strayed, Zeus chose to wipe the world clean and start anew. He brought forth a great flood, a deluge that would cover the earth and drown its wickedness. But in this act of destruction, there was also a spark of mercy. For one virtuous couple, Deucalion and Pyrrha, who remained faithful and good-hearted, were spared. They were allowed to survive the flood, and, standing on the dry land after the waters receded, they repopulated the earth by casting stones behind them, which, through divine power, transformed into new men and women, marking the beginning of a new human age. But peace did not last for long. The earth goddess Gaia, furious over the fate of her children, the Titans who had been defeated and imprisoned by Zeus, urged another set of her offspring, the giants, to rise up against the gods of Mount Olympus. These towering beings waged war on the heavens, trying to overthrow the Olympians and destroy their shining stronghold. The battle was fierce, but Zeus stood at the front of the gods' defense, unleashing his thunderbolts with devastating force. One by one, the giants fell, and their king was struck down by Zeus's unstoppable power, bringing their rebellion to an end. Yet Gaia was not finished. From her wrath she brought forth Typhoeus, the most fearsome monster ever born, a creature greater and more terrible than any before him. Typhoeus rose with fire and chaos, climbing toward Olympus, and the gods, struck with fear, fled from their thrones and hid in distant places. Even Zeus, strong as he was, faced defeat in his first encounter with the monster. Typhoeus tore the sinews from his limbs, leaving him helpless and broken, a god brought low. But the goat-footed god Pan, bold and clever, stole back the sinews and returned them to Zeus, restoring his strength. Once whole again, Zeus rose in power and met Typhoeus in battle once more, this time defeating the giant with all the fury of his lightning and binding him deep beneath Mount Etna, where his fury could only tremble the earth in the form of volcanic fire and smoke. Though king of the gods and guardian of law and order, Zeus was also known for his many pursuits of mortal women, taking on countless forms to reach them. He approached Leda in the shape of a swan, soft and white. He carried Europa across the sea while disguised as a gentle bull. He came to Danae as a golden shower, slipping past her prison. He entered the home of Alcmen in the guise of her own husband to lie beside her. He seduced Callisto, a follower of Artemis, by taking on the form of the virgin goddess herself. And he reached Antiope as a satyr, wild and impulsive. Each of these unions brought forth children, many of whom were heroes, kings, and founders of cities, their lives shaped by the power of their divine father. Of all his mortal children, Zeus had a special place in his heart for Heracles, a son born from one of these unions. Heracles, strong beyond measure and brave beyond fear, endured many hardships and labors. But Zeus stood by him, guiding him through his trials and helping him overcome each challenge. In time, after proving himself through suffering, strength, and courage, Heracles was raised to the status of a god and brought to Olympus, where he would live forever among the immortals, beside his father. Through battles against monsters and rebellion, through his rule in the heavens and influence on earth, Zeus remained at the center of divine power, his voice the final word in matters of fate and justice, his lightning a symbol of unchallengeable might, his presence in every storm and in every oath, the unshaken king of gods and men alike. Zeus did not only reward the good, but also brought severe punishment to those who defied the sacred order of heaven, especially the worst offenders of myth, whose crimes against the gods and the laws of nature were beyond forgiveness. Among the most infamous of these mortals was Tantalos, a man who, despite being granted the rare honor of dining with the gods, betrayed their trust by stealing the ambrosia and nectar of Olympus, the food and drink of immortality, and bringing it down to mortals, a theft that broke the sacred boundary between gods and men. As punishment, Zeus condemned him to the underworld, where he stood forever in a pool of water beneath a tree of fruit, both forever just out of reach, eternally tormented by hunger and thirst that could never be satisfied. Another villain who faced the wrath of Zeus was Lycaon, a king so twisted in heart that he sought to test the gods by serving them a meal of human flesh, a gruesome act of impiety that outraged the heavens. For this abomination, Zeus struck him down with a thunderbolt and turned him into a wolf, a creature cursed to live with the savagery he had embraced. Then there was Ixion, a man once welcomed to the halls of Olympus, who repaid that generosity by attempting to violate Hera, the queen of the gods. For this unforgivable crime, Zeus cast him into the underworld and bound him to a fiery spinning wheel that would turn without end, a symbol of endless punishment. Salmoneus was yet another mortal whose pride and arrogance led him to his doom. He tried to imitate the power of Zeus himself by riding through his city in a chariot, dragging chains and torches to mimic thunder and lightning, declaring himself a god. But the sky belongs to Zeus alone, and in his anger, he sent real lightning from the heavens to strike Salmoneus down, reducing him to ashes and showing all that no one could claim the glory of Olympus but him. In these and many other stories passed down through myth, Zeus stands as the enforcer of divine law, punishing the arrogant and the wicked who dared to insult or mock the gods. Alongside these tales of power and justice, Zeus was also known by the many symbols and attributes that marked his presence in art and story. His most iconic symbol was the lightning bolt, a stylized weapon of immense power that he held like a spear or javelin, thrown with unstoppable force and burning with heavenly fire. In his hand, it was not just a weapon, but a sign of his will, his anger, and his role as the enforcer of order across the sky and the earth. He also held a royal scepter, the sign of kingship and command, and often sat on a grand throne that reflected his status as ruler of Olympus. By his side or overhead soared the eagle, his sacred bird, sharp-eyed and majestic, soaring high like Zeus himself, a creature that served both as a symbol and as his messenger. Sometimes, the goddess Nike, the winged spirit of victory, was shown standing with him, small in size but powerful in meaning, representing Zeus's dominion over triumph in both war and competition. One of his more unique items was the aegis, a protective goatskin shield or arm guard, often linked with fear and power, a sacred item that radiated divine authority. In artistic depictions, Zeus was usually shown wearing a long robe known as a chiton and a flowing cloak called a himation, garments that added to his majestic appearance. Though in some works he was also depicted nude, symbolizing raw divine strength and the perfection of form. Around his head, he often wore a wreath made of olive leaves, a mark of peace, victory, and sacred tradition. These items were not mere decoration. They carried the weight of meaning and reminded all who saw them of his place above all others. Zeus also had sacred animals and plants that were closely tied to his identity and myths. The eagle, as already mentioned, was perhaps his most important animal, not only as his companion, but also as the form he used when he ascended into the skies or descended to earth for his many missions. In one myth, he took the shape of an eagle to abduct Ganymede, a beautiful youth, and carry him to the heavens to serve as cupbearer to the gods. The bull was another of Zeus's sacred animals, strong and noble, a beast tied to several myths, especially the story of Europa, whom Zeus carried across the sea after taking the form of a gentle bull. The plants held sacred to him were the evergreen holm oak and the olive tree, both long-living and full of meaning. At the Oracle of Dodona, one of the oldest and most sacred places in Greece, the priests listened to the rustling of holm oak leaves, believing that Zeus spoke through their movements, offering signs and answers. The olive tree, too, was a powerful symbol, especially at the Olympic Games held in his honor, where victors were crowned with wreaths made from the leaves of olive trees taken from Zeus's sacred grove, a living symbol of excellence and divine favor. These symbols, his animals, plants, and sacred items, were regularly featured in ancient art, carved in stone, painted on pottery, and cast in bronze, showing Zeus in his many forms, always at the center of divine and mortal life. Surrounding the god was not just a world of stories and symbols, but a great retinue of divine beings who served and guarded him. As the king of the gods, his throne was not left unguarded, and 4 winged spirits stood watch, 2 male and 2 female, their presence a sign of his power and the protection of Olympus. These divine attendants, though not always named in every story, represented strength, justice, and loyalty, standing ever ready to defend their master and the order he upheld. This divine court reflected Zeus's stature as the supreme authority, with lesser gods and spirits carrying out his will and ensuring that no chaos could rise against the peace and balance he fought to maintain. Through all these stories, images, and symbols, Zeus stands tall not only as a mythological figure but as the embodiment of rule, justice, and divine order. The one who brought the storm, enforced the law, and stood forever as the father of gods and men. Zeus, the mighty king of the gods and ruler of the heavens, did not sit alone on his throne atop Mount Olympus, for surrounding him was a powerful and loyal retinue of divine beings, each one holding a special place in the maintenance of cosmic order and the expression of his will. Closest to him were 4 winged spirits, embodiments of essential divine forces: Kratos, who represented strength; Zelos, who symbolized rivalry; Nike, the goddess of victory; and Baia, who personified force. These 4 stood as extensions of Zeus's might, always ready to act on his behalf. Kratos and Baia served as his muscular enforcers, unshakable in their duty and relentless in their pursuit of those who defied the will of the Sky Father. It was these 2 who were tasked with the important mission of capturing the Titan Prometheus, who had disobeyed Zeus by giving fire to mankind. They were not negotiators or thinkers, but pure strength and power, unquestioning and unyielding. Nike, on the other hand, had a more honored and graceful role. She was the divine spirit of triumph and served as the driver of Zeus's heavenly chariot, always speeding through the skies and battlefields. She was also often seen in miniature form, hovering near him like a divine shadow, a familiar who whispered victory with every movement of her wings. Beside these loyal attendants stood Hermes, the clever and quick-footed god who served as Zeus's personal herald. Hermes was not only a messenger, but also a diplomat and agent, someone who handled the more delicate and complicated affairs that required charm, wit, and discretion. He traveled swiftly between worlds, delivering decrees, gathering information, and ensuring that the will of Zeus reached all corners of existence. However, when the task required nothing but the faithful delivery of a message, it was Iris who performed the duty. This winged goddess of the rainbow served as a messenger who simply relayed Zeus's words exactly as spoken, never changing them, never interpreting them. She was like a living echo, appearing in the skies as a flash of color and light, carrying commands to gods and mortals alike. Sitting beside Zeus's throne was Themis, the goddess of divine law and order, a wise and eternal counselor who helped maintain the structure of heaven and earth. Themis was not merely a figure of wisdom. She was authority in its purest form, and from her came guidance that even Zeus respected. Around her stood her daughters, the Moirai and the Horai. The Moirai, also known as the Fates, were the mysterious sisters who spun, measured, and cut the threads of mortal lives, deciding how long each person would live and what their destiny would be. The Horai, or seasons, were the guardians of the natural order, overseeing the changing of time, the growth of crops, and the cycles that governed the world. Together, these goddesses kept the universe in balance, ensuring that everything moved according to divine rhythm and rule. Themis herself held the responsibility of calling the gods to assembly in the courtyard of Zeus, gathering the Olympians whenever important decisions had to be made, so that order and unity could be preserved. Within Zeus's great palace resided also his virgin sister Hestia, the quiet and steady goddess of the hearth. She tended the divine fire that burned at the center of his hall, a symbol of stability, peace, and home. Though not loud or imposing, her presence was deeply important, for without her, the flame of Olympus would grow cold, and the gods would lose their anchor. One of the most unusual beings close to Zeus was Metis, the goddess of wisdom. She did not walk the halls of Olympus, but instead existed within Zeus himself. Long ago, fearing a prophecy that warned that her child would overthrow him, Zeus swallowed Metis whole before she could give birth. But Metis was not destroyed. Instead, she continued to live within Zeus's belly, and since the ancient Greeks believed that thought and feeling came from the stomach rather than the head, this act gave Zeus the power of her wisdom directly inside him. She became part of his being, giving him counsel from within and preparing the birth of Athena, their daughter, who would one day spring fully grown and armed from his head. Even from this strange place, Metis equipped the unborn goddess with armor and weapons, acting as mother and blacksmith in a womb of divine thought. Also close to Zeus were those who brought nourishment to the gods. Ganymede, the beautiful Trojan youth whom Zeus had carried away to Olympus in the form of an eagle, served as one of his cupbearers. Alongside him stood the goddess Hebe, daughter of Zeus and Hera, who also performed this sacred task. Together they served ambrosia and nectar, the divine food and drink that sustained the immortals, during the grand feasts in the halls of heaven, ensuring that the gods remained ever youthful and full of vitality. Among the darker agents of Zeus's will were the Harpii, known in Greek as the Harpies. These winged creatures, sometimes beautiful but often described as wild and terrible, were called the hounds of Zeus. They served as agents of punishment and chaos, sent to harass or carry off those who had angered the king of the gods. With wings like storms and screeches like wind tearing through the sky, they were feared not for their power, but for their relentlessness. When Zeus sent them, it was not to destroy, but to torment, to snatch, to make life unbearable for those who had offended him or broken divine law. All these figures, be they god, spirit, or creature, formed the living court of Zeus, each playing a unique role in his vast and intricate system of rule. Each carried out duties that reflected an aspect of his power, his authority, or his divine presence. From the winged spirits of strength and victory who guarded his throne, to the agents of punishment who swept across the earth like shadows, to the divine minds that lived inside him or served at his table. The kingdom of Zeus was not held together by one god alone, but by a harmony of forces all serving one central will. The image of Zeus in his palace, surrounded by his many attendants and symbols, was more than just a picture of power. It was a symbol of structure, control, balance, and order. All things that he, as king of the gods, was sworn to uphold for eternity. Zeus was also the central figure around whom many myths and divine relationships revolved. Known for his thunder and lightning, for his throne high on Mount Olympus, and for the power he held over weather, law, and destiny, Zeus's presence in myth was vast and commanding. Among the many magical and divine beings in his service was Pegasus, the magnificent winged horse, who played an important role by carrying Zeus's thunderbolts, those blazing weapons of divine punishment and justice. Pegasus, swift and tireless, would soar across the skies with Zeus's thunder in tow, delivering the tools of the god's fury and might. Along with Pegasus, 4 immortal horses were harnessed to Zeus's grand chariot, drawing it through the heavens as he passed over the world below, a symbol of his ever-present gaze and his supreme dominion over all that lived. His movements through the skies, with lightning in hand and clouds at his back, were seen by mortals as thunder, wind, and storm, the visible signs of his divine journey across the firmament. The ancient sources tell us much about him, with many pages dedicated to the god's mythology, worship, and nature. Across the myths preserved by great poets and storytellers like Homer, Hesiod, Apollodorus, and others, Zeus is presented in all his complexity. As the protector, the punisher, the creator of order, and the father of many gods, demigods, and heroes. He was born to the Titans Kronos and Rhaia, two great figures of the older generation of deities. Kronos, fearing a prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, swallowed each one as soon as they were born, trapping them inside his belly. But when Rhaia gave birth to Zeus, she hid the child away and tricked Kronos by giving him a swaddled stone instead. Raised in secret, Zeus grew strong and wise, eventually forcing Kronos to disgorge his siblings, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia, and leading them in the war against the Titans that would bring about the reign of the Olympians. Zeus's marriage to his sister Hera, the sky goddess and queen of the gods, was one of the central unions of Olympus. Together they had 3 divine children: Ares, the god of war, Hebe, the goddess of youth, and Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth. These offspring played vital roles among the gods, each embodying important aspects of life and existence. But Hera was not Zeus's only consort, for he had many unions with goddesses and mortal women alike, and from these many relationships came a wide and complex family of divine children. With his sister Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, he fathered Persephone, the maiden who would become queen of the underworld. With his cousin Métis, the goddess of wisdom, he fathered Athena, though to prevent a prophecy that her child would overthrow him, Zeus swallowed Métis whole, and Athena was later born fully grown and armed from his head. With his cousin Leto, he fathered the twin gods Apollon and Artemis. Apollon, god of music, prophecy, and healing, and Artemis, goddess of the hunt and the moon. With Maia, one of the Pleiades and daughter of Atlas, he fathered Hermes, the clever messenger god. With his aunt Dione, he fathered Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. With Themis, the goddess of law and order, he fathered the Moirai, or fates, and the Horai, or seasons, who maintained the structure of time and destiny. With Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, he fathered the Musai, or muses, who inspired music, poetry, and the arts. With the mortal Semele, he fathered Dionysos, the god of wine and ecstasy, who would later be welcomed to Olympus as one of the immortal gods. But Zeus's children were not only gods and goddesses. He was also the father of many mortal heroes and kings, whose stories filled the pages of ancient epic and legend. Among the most famous of these were Perseus, the slayer of Medusa; Heracles, the strongest of all heroes, who performed 12 mighty labors and was eventually raised to Olympus as a god; and Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in the world, whose abduction sparked the Trojan War. These mortal offspring of Zeus often bore divine strength, wisdom, or beauty, and their adventures, triumphs, and tragedies were seen as extensions of their father's will or lessons drawn from divine interaction with the human world. The family of Zeus, immense and interconnected, was central to Greek myth, showing how the divine wove through the mortal world and shaped history, fate, and the cosmos itself. The pages of myth and the works of art created across the ancient world often depicted this vast family tree, showing the names and stories of his many children, consorts, and relatives. From simplified family diagrams to complex and detailed genealogies, the reach of Zeus's, bloodline stretched across generations and touched almost every corner of mythology. Whether in painted vases, carved stone reliefs, or written verses, the stories of Zeus's children revealed the wide range of his power and the many ways in which he influenced the world of gods and men. In these representations, we see the king of the gods not just as a ruler seated on a high throne, but as a force of life and legacy whose children carried on his influence in every domain: war, wisdom, beauty, music, love, and beyond. The divine amphorae and sculptures that survive from ancient times often show Zeus with his thunderbolt in hand, surrounded by these offspring or by symbols of his power. The power of Zeus was not only felt in the sky or through the booming of thunder, but also through the living legacy of his children and the impact they had on the world around them. As the greatest of the Olympian gods, his presence in myth was unmatched, and his family was a reflection of the many parts of existence he ruled over. From his earliest moments, when he escaped the jaws of Kronos, to his reign over Olympus with chariot, thunderbolt, eagle, and crown, to the endless line of descendants who carried his name and spirit into the tales of mortals and immortals, Zeus remained the central pillar of the divine order, the father not only of gods, but of the age itself. Zeus was born to the Titans Kronos and Rhea, a child destined to change the course of the cosmos. He was the youngest of 6 siblings, brother to Poseidon, who ruled the seas, to Hades, who ruled the underworld, to Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, to Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, and to Hera, the goddess of marriage and queen of the gods, who also became his wife. After the great battle with the Titans, when the old gods were defeated and the new order began, Zeus and his brothers divided the rule of the universe by casting lots. Poseidon was given dominion over the vast and restless oceans. Hades was given the gloomy depths of the underworld, and Zeus claimed the skies, the highest realm above, the place of clouds, storms, thunder, and light. But the earth itself, solid and shared beneath all realms, remained common to them all, and from this shared space rose the interactions of gods and mortals. Some ancient writers spoke of more than one Zeus, each tied to different local traditions: an Arcadian Zeus born of ether, another Arcadian one born of Kylus, and a Cretan Zeus born of Saturnus. But these were different reflections of the same divine figure, imagined in various times and places across Greece. Such tales gave rise to the idea that Zeus was not only a god, but also the very personification of the sky, with his name used to describe the heavens themselves and all the natural elements that come from them. Dew that softens the soil, rain that nourishes the crops, snow that whitens the peaks, thunder that shakes the air, and lightning that splits the sky. To the poets of old, the acts of weather were not just nature's doing, but Zeus himself moving through the world. In the Homeric epics, Zeus is described as dwelling atop Mount Olympus in Thessaly, the highest mountain in Greece, which was believed to pierce the very vault of heaven with its lofty summit, connecting the mortal realm with the divine. From this sacred peak, Zeus watched over all, and all gods and mortals felt the weight of his gaze. He was called the father of gods and men, not just in title but in truth, for his influence reached into every domain of life, and no one, divine or mortal, stood above him. Among the immortals, he was the most powerful, the one before whom all others bowed, the high ruler whose decisions shaped destiny itself. With his mind full of wisdom and his hand holding thunder, Zeus managed the affairs of the cosmos, not by force alone, but through counsel and judgment. He was the origin of kingship, the one who first gave shape to authority, order, and law. He stood at the beginning of all structures of power and balance, and around him stood goddesses like Dice, who represented justice, Themis, who stood for law and order, and Nemesis, who embodied retribution. These divine beings acted as his assistants, helping him govern not only the divine world, but also human affairs. Because of this role as a guardian of law and right conduct, Zeus was also given many sacred epithets that reflected his various duties. As Zeus Agoraios, he protected the gatherings of the people in the open assemblies, watching over their speeches and debates. As Zeus Boulaios, he watched over the councils, where the elders and rulers met to make decisions that guided their cities. In each of these roles, Zeus was the unseen hand ensuring that order remained intact. His presence extended even further, not just over states and nations, but into every home. As Zeus Herkaios, he guarded the hearth and the family, his spirit dwelling within the courtyard, protecting the household and offering stability. His watchful eye was never far from the daily lives of the people, for his concern did not lie only in the affairs of kings and heroes, but in the quiet lives of families and individuals. In this way, the power of Zeus was all-encompassing. He was present in the storms that broke the sky open, in the calm that followed, in the structure of society, and in the fire that burned at the heart of each home. His influence could be seen and felt everywhere, not because he always acted, but because everything followed the rules he set. Zeus was not only the ruler of the gods, but the foundation of divine and human law, the balance that held everything together. His will, though sometimes mysterious, was believed to be just, and even when he acted in anger, it was seen as a correction, a return to balance. He watched over oaths, forsworn promises, sacred rituals, and justice for strangers and guests. And he stood against arrogance and excess, punishing those who rose too high or ignored the sacred customs. From the height of Mount Olympus, through every thunderstorm, in the whispers of ancient assemblies, and in the silence of a burning hearth, Zeus remained the king, not only of Olympus, but of every realm that knew law, sky, and order. Zeus was the divine guardian of law, justice, and the sacred customs that bound human society together. He watched over the sanctity of the oath, known as Zeus Horkios, ensuring that promises made under his name were kept and not broken. For to swear falsely before Zeus was to invite divine wrath and punishment. He also upheld the sacred law of hospitality under the title Zeus Xenios, protecting the bond between host and guest, a relationship so important in the ancient world that even the poorest stranger who knocked at one's door was under Zeus's divine protection. As Zeus Hykesios, he was the protector of suppliants, those who came seeking help, refuge, or mercy, for he looked kindly upon those who bowed in desperation and stretched out their hands in pleading. To mistreat a guest, a stranger, or a beggar was to offend Zeus directly, for he saw all, judged all, and would avenge the wronged. As Epopsios, the all-seeing god, he watched over the doings and sufferings of all mortals, recording their actions and ensuring that no injustice passed unnoticed. He was not only a god of justice, but the one who enforced it with power, bringing ruin to the arrogant and lifting up the oppressed. Zeus was also the original source of all prophecy, the divine wellspring from which every true oracle, vision, or sign originated. Known as Panomphaos, the sender of all omens, he was the one whose voice echoed in the leaves of Dodana's sacred oak, whose will was heard in thunder, lightning, the flight of birds, or the dreams of kings. No prophecy had power unless it ultimately came from him, and no fate was sealed unless Zeus allowed it. Though the fates spun their threads, Zeus was above even fate itself. For everything, good and bad, joy and sorrow, success and failure, was his to give or take, and the lot of every mortal came down according to his will. In the Homeric epics, the will of Zeus was the final word. Armed with thunder and lightning, his weapons of divine authority and judgment, he could strike down any who opposed him. When he shook the Aegis, his fearsome shield of storm and power, he unleashed winds and clouds, stirring the skies into violent rage. The very air responded to his anger, and the earth trembled under his hand. He was often called by epithets such as the Thunderer, the Cloud Gatherer, and the God of the Storm, for these forces were not merely weather. They were Zeus himself in motion. The earth, the sea, and the sky knew his power, and all who lived beneath the heavens waited on his mood. Zeus was married to Hera, his sister and queen of the gods, a union both powerful and tumultuous. Together they had two sons, Ares, the fierce god of war, and Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship, as well as a daughter, Hebe, the goddess of youth. But even though Hera was his wife, she did not always stand quietly beside him. She was ambitious and proud, and at times she acted on her own will, opposing Zeus and challenging his decisions. Yet, despite her independence and strength, she remained beneath his rule, and when she rebelled too greatly, Zeus punished her to remind her and all others that no god could stand equal to him. Her jealousy was most often stirred by Zeus's many affairs with other goddesses and mortal women. These amours were not hidden from Hera, and while she could not stop them, she often responded with vengeance and schemes, unleashing her wrath on the women or their children, but never on Zeus himself, whose authority she could not break. The gods on Olympus often watched these tensions unfold, knowing well that while Hera had her power, Zeus remained supreme. During the Trojan War, one of the most important and long-lasting conflicts in myth, Zeus played a central role. At the request of Thetis, the sea goddess and mother of Achilles, Zeus agreed to tip the balance in favor of the Trojans after Agamemnon had dishonored Achilles, one of Greece's greatest warriors. Even though many gods took sides in the war, some with the Greeks, others with the Trojans, Zeus's will was final, and his decisions shaped the course of the battle. The rise and fall of heroes, the burning of ships, the fate of cities, all moved according to the design of Zeus. Though his favor might change, and though he allowed the gods to interfere at times, the greater arc of the war and its end belonged to him alone. Long before these myths, Zeus was likely worshipped as a god connected to nature, especially in places like Dodona and Arcadia. In those early traditions, he was not only the god of the sky, but also tied to the fertile oak tree, whose acorns fed the people, and to the sacred doves that lived among its branches. At Dodona, one of his most ancient and sacred sites, his priests and priestesses listened to the rustling of the oak leaves and the calls of birds to hear his voice, interpreting divine will not through fire or visions, but through the sounds of nature itself. Rain, storms, and winds were not random acts of weather, but messages and movements of Zeus, who governed the balance between sky and earth. In Arcadia, too, where wild mountains and thick forests stretched across the land, Zeus was honored not as a distant sky father, but as a presence within the living world, watching over the land and its people. Whether as the god of the high heavens or the protector of sacred laws, Zeus remained the central figure in Greek religion and myth. His presence was felt in every temple, every household, every battlefield, and every council. He was the giver of signs, the protector of the weak, the punisher of the wicked, the father of the gods, and the master of storms. From his throne atop Olympus, he ruled with thunder in hand, justice in heart, and the unshakable authority of one who held all fate within his grasp. The stories told of him across generations, from the chants of priests to the verses of poets, from the carved stones of temples to the whispered prayers of travelers, all spoke of one truth, that Zeus was king, and his power, both feared and revered, shaped the world from the heights of the sky to the depths of mortal lives. Zeus was born into a time of fear and struggle, a time when his father Kronos ruled with cruel certainty and devoured his children to prevent the prophecy that one of them would rise up and overthrow him. From the very beginning, Zeus's path was not one of ease or comfort, but of secrecy, danger, and eventual triumph. His mother Rhea, knowing the fate that had befallen her other children, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, could not bear to see another child swallowed whole by Kronos. Desperate and determined, she turned to Uranus, the sky, and Ge, the earth, for counsel. These primal gods, older and wiser, advised her to flee to the island of Crete before her time of labor arrived. Obeying their guidance, Rhea went to Lyctos in Crete and hid herself away in the deep and secretive places of the land. There, in a cave on Mount Aegaeon, hidden from the eyes of Kronos and protected by the wilderness, she gave birth to Zeus. To save her newborn son, she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and handed it to Kronos, who, thinking it to be the child, swallowed it without hesitation. This act of deception saved Zeus and set in motion the events that would change the balance of power in the cosmos. Some stories place the birth and upbringing of Zeus not only in Mount Aegaeon, but also on other sacred mountains like Dicte or Ida in Crete, the Trojan Ida, or even further afield in places like Ithome in Messenia, Thebes in Boeotia, Aegion in Achaia, or Olenos in Aetolia. Each of these places held its own tradition and sacred claim to the infancy of Zeus, but the most widely accepted version of the tale remained the one rooted in Crete. In that wild, remote land, guarded by the Curetes, whose clashing shields masked the infant's cries, Zeus grew strong, protected from the eyes and ears of Kronos. In some versions, Rhea was closely identified with Ge herself, and thus Zeus was also called the son of Ge, the earth, reinforcing his deep connection to both heaven and earth. Meanwhile, as Zeus grew in safety and strength, Kronos ruled in ignorance, unaware of the child that would eventually rise against him. When the time came for Zeus to challenge his father, he acted with wisdom and strategy. Following the cunning advice of Ge, or perhaps Métis, the goddess of wisdom, Kronos was made to disgorge the children he had swallowed. One by one, the gods returned. First, the stone that had taken Zeus's place, which Zeus would later set up as a symbol at Delphi, and then his siblings, reborn into the world they had been denied. Now, with his brothers and sisters by his side, Zeus stood ready to claim what was foretold. His first great act was to release the Cyclops, the one-eyed giants who had been bound in chains by Kronos. In gratitude for their freedom, these powerful beings gifted Zeus with thunder and lightning, the weapons that would become his most feared and defining attributes. On the further advice of Ge, he also freed the 100-handed giants, the Hecatoncheires, mighty creatures with immense strength. Among them was Briareos, whose loyalty and power would prove invaluable in the battle to come. Armed now with allies and divine weapons, Zeus led the younger gods in a mighty war against the Titans, a battle known as the Titanomachy. It was not a short or easy war, for the Titans were strong and deeply rooted in the old ways of the cosmos. But with the Cyclops forging thunder and lightning, and the 100-armed giants hurling boulders like rain, the forces of Zeus steadily gained ground. The skies echoed with thunder, the earth quaked under the force of battle, and the balance of the world shifted. Finally, after a long and terrible struggle, Zeus and his allies triumphed. The Titans were defeated and cast into the deep pit of Tartaros, a shadowy prison far beneath the earth. With victory secured, Zeus and his brothers divided the world among themselves. Poseidon took command of the seas, Hades claimed the underworld, and Zeus, with his throne high above all, became the ruler of the heavens. Yet the earth itself remained common to all three, a shared realm between the sky, sea, and the underworld, a place where mortals lived under the gaze of the gods. In time, the image of Zeus changed. While in earlier stories he may have appeared as a personification of the forces of nature, associated with the oak trees that bore edible fruit, and the sacred doves of Dodona, as well as symbols of abundance like milk, honey, and the cornucopia, the Homeric poems show a Zeus who had already become more than a nature god. He had become a political and national figure, a divine ruler of human order, justice, and law. He was not just the bringer of rain and storms, but the king and father of all people, the protector of traditions, laws, and institutions sanctified by custom and religious practice. In these later epics and hymns, Zeus was the one who upheld the structure of society itself, standing above all other deities as the final judge, the one whose authority ensured stability in the divine and mortal realms alike. Though his power came from ancient roots, tied to the earth and sky, Zeus grew into a god of leadership, wisdom, and absolute rule, a figure both awe-inspiring and foundational to Greek belief. From the moment Rhea wrapped that stone in cloth to the thunder that rolled across the heavens, every story of Zeus echoed with the rise of a god who was destined not only to lead the gods, but to bring order to a world born from chaos. When the great battle between the gods and the Titans was drawing near, Zeus, having grown in strength and wisdom, knew that he would need more than just courage and thunderbolts to win this war that would decide the fate of all existence. So, following the advice of Ge, the earth, he reached down into the depths of the world and released three powerful allies who had long been imprisoned: Cottus, Briareos, and Gaius, known as the Hecaton Charis, the 100-handed ones. Each of them had immense strength and many arms, and with their help, the force of the Olympians was greatly increased. With their aid, Zeus led the gods into battle against the mighty Titans, those ancient beings born of Uranus and Ge, who had once ruled the cosmos under the leadership of Kronos. The war was long and fierce, but Zeus, armed with his thunder and lightning, and supported by the might of his divine brothers, sisters, the Cyclops, and the Hecaton Chaires, eventually overcame the Titans. After their defeat, he cast them into the deepest pit of the world, Tartarus, a place as far below the earth as the heavens are above it. There, in the dark and endless prison, the Titans were chained and guarded forever by the Hecaton Chaires themselves, the very beings they had once cast down. But the victory was not without consequence, for the very earth groaned in pain at the imprisonment of her children, and in her anger, Ge, together with Tartarus, brought forth one final challenge to Zeus's rule. Typhoeus, a monstrous and terrifying creature unlike anything seen before. Typhoeus rose from the earth with countless serpentine heads, eyes burning with fire, and a voice that shook the mountains. A great battle followed, one more fearful than even the war with the Titans. The skies turned black, the seas churned, the mountains cracked, and the whole world held its breath as Zeus faced the terrible creature. But Zeus, strong and unyielding, stood firm. With thunder in one hand and lightning in the other, he fought Typhoeus with all the power of the heavens. In the end, Zeus conquered him too, casting him down and restoring peace to the cosmos. With this final victory, Zeus claimed dominion over all, becoming not just the ruler of the skies, but of the entire world. With his power secure, Zeus chose for his first wife the goddess Métis, a daughter of Oceanus and known for her great wisdom. When Métis became pregnant, Zeus was warned by Uranus and Gaia that the child she carried might one day overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his own father. Fearing this fate, but still seeking to preserve the wisdom of Métis, Zeus swallowed her whole before she could give birth. This act, though strange, was seen as wise, for now Métis lived within him, and through her he possessed foresight and wisdom. But the child within Métis had not perished. She grew inside Zeus until the day came when he felt a great pain in his head. From his skull, fully formed and clad in armor, the goddess Athena emerged, born of Zeus alone, a symbol of wisdom, courage, and strategy. After Métis, Zeus took Themis as his second wife, and by her he fathered the Horai, goddesses of the seasons and natural order, and the Moirai, the fates who spun, measured, and cut the threads of every life. With Eurynome, he fathered the Charites, the Graces, known for beauty, charm, and joy. With Demeter, his sister, he sired Persephone, the maiden who would become queen of the underworld. With Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, he fathered the 9 muses, who inspired song, poetry, history, and all the arts. With the gentle goddess Leto, Zeus had the twin gods Apollo, lord of light and prophecy, and Artemis, goddess of the hunt. With Hera, his queen, he had 3 children: Hebe, the goddess of youth; Ares, the god of war; and Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth. Athena, as already told, was born from Zeus's head. In response to Zeus's many affairs and the miraculous birth of Athena, Hera, full of pride and anger, decided to bear a child without any union at all. From her alone came Hephaestus, the smith god, skilled with fire and forge. With all these children, divine and powerful, the family of Zeus and the line of Kronos came to be known as the Olympians, the 12 greatest gods who ruled from Mount Olympus. These included Zeus himself, the supreme ruler, Poseidon, god of the sea, Apollo, god of light and music, Ares, god of war, Hermes, the swift messenger, Hephaestus, god of the forge, Hestia, goddess of the hearth, Demeter, goddess of grain, Hera, queen of the gods, Athena, goddess of wisdom, Aphrodite, goddess of love, and Artemis, the huntress. These 12 were honored together in temples and festivals, especially in places like Athens, where they were worshipped as a single group of powerful deities. Though their personalities, roles, and domains varied, they all stood under the rule of Zeus, the high god, the father of gods and men, who held court atop Olympus, presiding over the affairs of both heaven and earth. As Greek civilization expanded and evolved, these Olympians became central to the culture and imagination of the people. Their stories were told in songs, epics, and plays, and statues of their likenesses stood in temples and sanctuaries across the land. Eventually, as Greek influence spread into Roman lands, the Romans adopted these deities as their own. They gave them Latin names. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Hermes became Mercury, and so on. but their powers and personalities remained the same. The stories, the worship, and the reverence carried on, showing how the image of Zeus, the once hidden infant in the cave of Crete, had risen to become not just a god of one land, but a divine king recognized across the known world. In examining the many local stories about Zeus, it becomes clear that different places had their own versions of the god. Some traditions spoke of several different deities who held the title of Zeus in their own regions. There were at least 3 separate versions, each one considered supreme in its local context. But over time, these local forms of Zeus blended into one greater figure, a god who unified all these traits into the one name and image of the great Zeus of Olympus, king of gods, master of storms, father of laws, and upholder of justice throughout all creation. Zeus, though known widely as the single supreme god of the Greek pantheon, was in the beginning worshipped in different forms across various regions, and each of these local traditions saw him slightly differently, emphasizing unique aspects of his power and presence. Over time, these separate identities were gradually merged by the people into a single, unified figure of divine authority, a national god who embodied all these local qualities in one. But the stories and customs of these regional Zeuses still reveal the deep roots and sacred places associated with him. Among these regional forms was the Arcadian Zeus, also called Zeus Lycaos, whose myths were centered in the rugged and ancient land of Arcadia. According to the traditions of this land, Zeus was born not in Crete, as some believed, but in Arcadia itself, either on Mount Parassion or on a part of Mount Lycaon known as Cretaea. There, hidden in the thick forests and steep slopes of the mountain, the infant god was brought up by 3 nurturing nymphs, Thaisoa, Neda, and Hagno. Each of these nymphs became connected to the land in a lasting way, with Thaisoa giving her name to a town, Nada to a river, and Hagno to a sacred spring. In this version of the story, Zeus grew not in the warmth of an island cave, but in the cold mists of the Arcadian mountains, surrounded by nature and protected by divine caretakers. In Arcadia, the reverence for Zeus took on a particularly ancient and wild form. One of the key figures in this worship was Lycaon, a son of the primordial Pelasgus, who was said to have founded the oldest town of Lycosura. It was Lycaon who first named the god Zeus Lycaos and built a temple in his honor. He also created the festival of the Lycaea, held in reverence to the god. But Lycaon's devotion was not without darkness, for the myths say that in a horrific act of sacrifice, he offered up his own son as part of the ritual to Zeus. This act, deeply offensive to the god, resulted in Lycaon being transformed into a wolf, which tied his name forever to the Greek word for wolf, leukos. This tale of punishment served as a warning and reminder of Zeus's demand for respect, purity, and justice in worship. The sanctuary of Zeus Lycaos on Mount Lycaon was a place shrouded in mystery and dread. It was strictly forbidden for anyone to enter this holy site, and the legends warned that anyone who did so would not live beyond the year. The place was so sacred, so beyond the mortal world, that even within it, neither humans nor animals cast a shadow. Those who knowingly crossed into the sanctuary were hunted down and stoned unless they could escape, and those who stumbled upon it by accident were sent away to Eleutherai. On the highest peak of Mount Lycaon stood an altar dedicated to Zeus, facing the rising sun, and before it stood 2 pillars crowned with golden eagles, symbols of the god's royal and celestial power. The sacrifices carried out on this mountaintop altar were performed in secrecy, adding to the sacred and forbidden nature of the place. This version of Zeus, wild and terrifying in his justice, rooted in blood and shadow, reflected the ancient, primal reverence of the Arcadians. But Arcadia was not the only land to claim a unique form of Zeus. Another deeply important regional version was the Dodonaian Zeus, worshipped in the sanctuary of Dodona in northwestern Greece. Though this portion of the account continues elsewhere, what we know from other descriptions is that Dodona was one of the oldest oracles in Greece, and here Zeus was honored not through thunder or lightning, but through the whispering of leaves. The priests and priestesses of Dodona listened to the rustling of the sacred oak trees and interpreted them as the voice of the god, revealing his wishes and prophecies. This Zeus was wise and ancient, connected not only to the power of nature but to fate and foresight. And then there was the Cretan Zeus, the version more widely known in the mythological tradition, where he was born on the island of Crete, hidden in a cave to escape Kronos. Raised by the goat Amaltheia and protected by the armored Curetes, whose clashing shields drowned out the cries of the baby god. The Cretan version emphasized the cunning and destiny of Zeus, the child saved by his mother's wit and by divine protection, the one who would one day rise up to free his brothers and sisters, defeat the Titans, and take his place as ruler of the cosmos. But in the early days, these many forms of Zeus, Arcadian, Dodonaian, Cretan, were each seen as separate divine figures in their own regions. Each community saw their Zeus as the true one, shaped by their land, their traditions, and their understanding of the divine. Yet over generations, as Greek society grew more, united through trade, politics, war, and shared language, these various images of the god began to merge. The Arcadian Zeus with his secret mountaintop rites, the Dodonaian Zeus who spoke through oaks and winds, and the Cretan Zeus who escaped death and brought order, all became part of one great being. This process was not fast or simple, but in time a national Zeus emerged, a single figure who represented all that each of these traditions honored. This Zeus, shaped by myths old and new, came to be the one worshipped across the entire Greek world, a god of thunder and wisdom, of law and prophecy, of nature and kingship, a divine figure who had his roots in many lands, and yet stood above all as the greatest of the Olympians. Through this evolution, the people of Greece found unity in their belief, even as they honored the varied stories of their ancestors. Each sacred mountain, each hidden cave, each grove and temple added a thread to the wide and powerful fabric of Zeus's story. And so the god, who once had many faces, became the one king of gods and men, seated on high, watching over all, and forever tied to the many lands and voices that once called him their own. Zeus Dodonaios, also known as Pelasgikos, was revered at the most ancient oracle in Greece, located at Dodona in the region of Epirus, near the mountain called Tomarus, or sometimes Tamarus or Tamuris. From this place, Zeus took one of his many names, and here he was mainly worshipped as a god of prophecy, a divine figure who revealed the future and guided the decisions of mortals and gods alike. At Dodona, the sacred oak tree was the symbol most closely connected to him, a living link to the god's voice and power. It was said that the rustling of the oak leaves carried messages from Zeus himself, messages that the priests and priestesses of Dodona carefully interpreted for those who sought his guidance. The god was also believed to have been raised by the Dodonaian nymphs, known as the Hyades, who cared for him in his youth and connected him deeply to the natural world around that sacred place. This oracle was not only a religious center, but also a beacon of wisdom and foresight, making Zeus the source of divine knowledge for many ancient Greeks who traveled there to hear his will. Moving from Dodona to the island of Crete, we meet another powerful form of Zeus, known as Zeus Dictaios or Cretajanes, meaning the Cretan Zeus. This version of Zeus's story is told most famously in the Theogony of Hesiod, which describes how Rhea, his mother, gave birth to him secretly in a cave on Mount Dicte to hide him from his father Kronos, who had swallowed his earlier children. To protect the infant Zeus, Rhea entrusted him to the care of the Curetes, a group of fierce warriors whose noisy shield clashing masked the baby's cries, and to the nurturing nymphs Adrasteia and Ida, daughters of the beekeeper Melicius. The infant god was fed the milk of the goat Amaltheia, whose nurturing was essential for his growth and survival, and the bees of the mountain gave him sweet honey as food. Crete, therefore, is called the island or nurse of the great Zeus, marking it as a sacred land intimately connected with his earliest days and divine nature. Worship of Zeus in Crete is among the oldest in Greece, reflecting a deep tradition that honored him as both a god of the wild mountain and a protector of order. Specific places in Crete held special importance in his cult, such as the district around Mount Ida, where the ancient city of Knossos stood, said to have been founded by the Curetes themselves and ruled by the legendary king Minos, who was known to have communed with Zeus. Another sacred site was Gortyn, where myths tell of Zeus taking the form of a mighty bull to carry away Europa from Phoenicia, a tale that links the god to the land and its people in both divine and earthly ways. In Gortyn, Zeus was worshipped under the surname Hecatombaios, which recalls the great sacrifices made to honor him, symbolizing his power and role as a god who demanded respect and offerings from his followers. These different names, places, and stories about Zeus in Dodona and Crete show how the god was connected to natural forces like trees and mountains, as well as to sacred rituals and ancient kingdoms. While Zeus was known throughout Greece and beyond as the king of gods, these regional forms reveal how he was understood and honored in ways that reflected the landscapes, peoples, and traditions of each place. Over time, as Greek culture developed and spread, these various local Zeuses merged in the minds of the people into one great national god, who combined all these traits and stories into a single powerful figure. This unified Zeus became the god who ruled the heavens and the earth, the master of thunder and lightning, the keeper of law and order, and the father of gods and men. But the memory of his many faces remained alive in the rituals, festivals, and temples scattered across the Greek world, each reminding the faithful of the long and rich history behind the god who watched over them all. Zeus was honored not only in distant places like Crete and Dodona, but also in many towns around Mount Dicte, including Lyctos, Presos, Hierapitna, Bienos, Eleuthernae, and Oaxus, where his presence was deeply felt through local traditions and sacred rites. These towns, nestled in the rugged Cretan landscape, held Zeus close to their hearts, weaving him into the very fabric of their daily lives, their culture, and their spiritual practices. Yet beyond these regional centers, Zeus was celebrated as a national god, a figure who united all Greeks under his divine authority. This national Hellenic Zeus was especially revered at Olympia in Elis, where every 5 years the great Panegyris, a festival gathering all Greeks in a sacred assembly, honored him with athletic contests, religious ceremonies, and communal celebrations. Olympia's temple to Zeus was not just a local shrine, but a symbol of the shared faith and identity of the entire Hellenic world. Here, Zeus was recognized as the father and king of gods and men, the supreme deity who ruled over heaven and earth with justice and power. His statue at Olympia, created by the renowned sculptor Pheidias just before the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War, was considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. The design of this majestic statue was inspired by the words of Homer, who described Zeus as the Lord of all, mighty and imposing, seated on a throne, holding a scepter, and wielding a figure of Nike, the goddess of victory, in his hand. This statue captured the sublime and awe-inspiring nature of Zeus, embodying his role as the protector and overseer of the Greek people and their laws. According to the traditions of Elis, it was Kronos who first ruled over the land, and in the Golden Age, a temple dedicated to him stood at Olympia, marking the deep roots of divine kingship in the region. When Kronos' time came to an end, the infant Zeus was entrusted by his mother Rhea to the Idaean dactyls, mysterious beings also called kuretes, believed to have come from Mount Ida in Crete, and who played a crucial role in protecting and raising the young god. Among these dactyls was Heracles, who became famous for his strength and feats. In one story, Heracles competed in a foot race against his brothers, the dactyls, and crowned the victor with an olive wreath. This act is said to have started the tradition of the Olympic Games, where athletes from all over Greece would gather to compete in honor of Zeus. There are also tales of Zeus contending with Kronos for the kingdom of Elis, a struggle that symbolizes the passing of power from one divine generation to the next and reflects the natural order of succession in mythology. Across Greece and its many colonies, poets and worshippers gave Zeus an immense number of epithets and surnames. These names were often drawn from the places where Zeus was worshipped, highlighting his widespread presence, but they also reflected his many powers and roles. Zeus was a god of the sky, thunder, and weather, but also the protector of law, justice, and order. He was the guarantor of oaths and hospitality, and the judge who punished the wicked and rewarded the good. Because his worship spanned such a vast area and included countless communities, it would be nearly impossible to list all the places and titles connected to him. Yet some symbols remained constant throughout Greece. The eagle, soaring high in the sky, was sacred to Zeus, representing his power and dominion over the heavens. The oak tree was another important symbol, its strength and longevity reflecting the god's enduring authority. Mountains, especially high peaks that seemed to reach toward the heavens, were also holy places dedicated to Zeus, places where mortals could feel closer to the divine and witness his mighty presence. Sacrifices to Zeus often involved goats, bulls, and cows, animals that were valuable and respected, given to the god in hopes of securing his favor and protection. In artistic depictions, Zeus was commonly shown holding a scepter, symbolizing his rule and command, and occasionally accompanied by an eagle or the figure of Nike, emphasizing his royal power and role as a bringer of victory. His appearance was majestic and solemn, often clothed in a long robe and crowned with a wreath of olive leaves, the same olive that crowned victors at the Olympic Games. This combination of symbols and rituals created a rich tapestry that conveyed the greatness of Zeus and his importance in the lives of the ancient Greeks. In all these ways, through sacred places, festivals, statues, symbols, and stories, Zeus stood as the unchallenged king of gods and men, a figure who united many peoples, traditions, and beliefs under his thunderous and wise gaze, ruling from his lofty throne with justice, strength, and unyielding authority. Zeus was often depicted in art and mythology with powerful symbols that spoke to his immense authority and divine nature. One of his most distinctive emblems was the eagle, a majestic bird soaring high above the earth, symbolizing Zeus's rule over the sky, and his far-reaching gaze that could see all beneath him. The thunderbolt was another critical attribute, a weapon forged by the Cyclops, and granted to Zeus as a symbol of his control over storms, lightning, and thunder. a reminder of his power to punish the wicked and enforce justice. In his hand, Zeus sometimes held a figure of victory, the winged goddess Nike, symbolizing triumph and success under his command, while at other times he bore a cornucopia, a horn overflowing with fruits and grain, representing abundance, prosperity, and the blessings he could bestow upon mortals and gods alike. These symbols were more than mere decoration. They represented his role as the giver and taker of fortune, the ruler who could bring both wrath and favor. When dressed in ceremonial form, the Olympian Zeus was often shown wearing a wreath of olive leaves, which connected him to peace, wisdom, and the sacred traditions of the Olympic Games, a festival held in his honor every 4 years, where athletes competed for glory under his watchful eye. In contrast, the Dodonaian Zeus, worshipped at the ancient oracle of Dodona, was crowned with a wreath of oak leaves, signifying strength, endurance, and the sacred grove where priests interpreted the rustling of the oak leaves as messages from the god. These two wreaths reflected the different aspects of Zeus's worship across Greece, one emphasizing victory and civilization, the other emphasizing nature and prophecy. In works of ancient art and sculpture, Zeus was usually shown as the omnipotent father figure, the supreme king over gods and men, embodying the qualities of justice, power, and wisdom. This ideal image was most famously embodied in the statue of Zeus at Olympia, crafted by the sculptor Phidias, which stood as a symbol of divine authority and grandeur, impressing all who beheld it with its sheer size and majestic detail. The great poet Homer celebrated Zeus in his hymns as the Most High, the chief of gods, all-seeing and wise, whose words inspired law and order through the goddess Themis, who leaned toward him to receive his counsel. These hymns praised Zeus as the fulfiller of all things, the protector who watched over the world with kindness and justice. Later Orphic hymns echoed this reverence, describing Zeus as supremely great and much honored, the divine king who produces all things through his mind, from the earth and mountains to the depths of the sea and the vast sky above. He was called Cronion, a son of Kronos, magnanimous and commanding, a god whose mighty nod could shake the earth and whose thunder and lightning announced his presence. The Orphic tradition highlighted Zeus as the source of abundance and purity, a god who was the beginning and the end of all things, from whom all nature springs and to whom prayers for health and peace were offered. Through these hymns and symbols, the ancient Greeks understood Zeus not just as a powerful god, but as a complex figure who combined the forces of nature with the ideals of justice, order, and prosperity, a deity whose presence was felt in the storms that rolled across the sky, in the victories of men, and in the peace of their homes. This rich tapestry of imagery and devotion reveals the depth of Zeus's role in Greek life and belief, showing him as a god who was both fearsome and benevolent, distant yet intimately connected to the world of gods and mortals. Zeus was revered with awe for his ability to command the skies and wield his mighty power over nature and humanity alike. The Orphic hymns, ancient Greek poems dedicated to the gods, capture this majestic image of Zeus as the supreme wielder of thunder and lightning, the one who shakes the very world from his lofty heights. He was called Zeus Keraunos, or Zeus of Thunder, a fatherly figure who sent down fiery bolts flashing with unbearable light, his sacred thunderclaps echoing through the shining realms of the immortal gods. These thunders were not just loud noises, but divine forces that shook the blessed abodes where the gods lived, announcing his presence with a power that was both holy and terrifying. Zeus was described as enveloped in dark, swirling clouds that hid the flaming lightning he brandished, the source of storms and fierce fiery darts that flew through the skies with terrible sound and force. His rapid, ethereal bolts could raise the hair on a person's head and fill the heart with wild fear, sudden and unstoppable, like the forces of nature themselves. With unbounded noise, he spread his power everywhere, throwing flames and bolts that rolled across the heavens with a terrifying might that no one could tame. The earth, called all-parent because it nourishes all living things, trembled before his wrathful fire, and even the shining sea and all creatures heard the sound and feared in horror. When the sky was lit up by flashing fire and the heavens roared with thunder, it was a sign of Zeus's presence, tearing the blue sky with white thunderbolts that burst through the air's veil. To the people who worshipped him, Zeus was all blessed and feared, and they prayed that his severe wrath would appear in the depths of the ocean or on the mountaintops, but hoped for his favor and protection. They asked him to be kind to their sacred rites, to grant those who honored him a divine life filled with health, peace, and clear thinking, to guide them rightly through life. Another hymn called Zeus Astrapaios, or Zeus the Lightning Maker, praised the god's mighty and holy light that was bright, fiery, and terrible, filling the sky with dazzling flashes that showed his power over air and storm. These hymns together create a vivid picture of Zeus as a god who was not just a ruler in heaven, but a force of nature itself, commanding the storms and guiding the fate of men and gods with his thunderous voice and lightning bolts. In all of these ancient verses, Zeus appears as a powerful and supreme god, whose strength was both feared and admired, who ruled the skies and brought both destruction and blessing, making him a central figure in the religious and cultural life of the ancient Greeks. His presence was felt everywhere, in the crackling of lightning, the roar of thunder, the shaking of the earth, and the quiet peace that followed the storm, reminding all that Zeus was the all-powerful Lord of heaven and earth, protector of order, justice, and life itself. Zeus also the source of life, justice, and fate. In the ancient Orphic hymns, he is called with reverence and awe, described as having an angry voice that lights up the sky with shining, clear flashes of lightning, cutting through clouds that crash and roar with noise. This voice is untamed, wild, and full of fierce power, belonging to a god who holds the force of resentment and harsh judgment, but who is also pure and holy. He is called all-parent because from him all things in the world are born and sustained, great and strong beyond measure. The people who worshipped Zeus prayed that he would come kindly to their sacred rites, attending to their prayers and granting mortals a peaceful and pleasing end to their lives. They saw him as both a fearsome god who could punish and a benevolent one who could protect and bless, able to give life and also take it away, the ultimate master of human destiny. Another hymn, Orphic Hymn 73, addresses Zeus as the mighty ruling daimon, a powerful spirit or divine presence that holds sway over all. In this hymn, Zeus is called mild and life-giving, the source from which all things flow, and the one who brings plenty and wealth to mankind when he is pleased and present in their homes. Yet the same God can also cause suffering and distress when he withholds the gifts of life and happiness, showing that he controls both joy and sorrow in the lives of humans. It is said that Zeus alone, with his boundless might, holds the keys to sorrow and delight, meaning that he decides when men will suffer or when they will find happiness. The hymn asks this holy, blessed Father to hear the prayer of the worshipper, to disperse the seeds of harmful care and sadness that consume life, and to come with a favoring mind to the sacred rites. The worshippers seek from Zeus a glorious and blessed end to their lives, asking for his divine guidance and protection. In these ancient poems, Zeus appears not only as a god of storms and thunder, but also as a ruler of human fate, the giver and taker of blessings, a powerful yet merciful father figure who governs the balance of life and death, joy and sorrow, justice and mercy. This dual nature of Zeus, both terrifying and kind, makes him a central figure in the minds of those who revered him, and his influence extended into every part of their lives, from the weather above to the destiny of every mortal below. The power of Zeus was everywhere, and his will shaped the world and the lives within it, a reminder to all that the God of the skies was also the God of all that is human, divine, and eternal.